Hi everybody, this is the video for Unit 4, which is about thinking about graduate school. Should you go to graduate school? If so, what kind of program, where, and most importantly, once you've decided on going to graduate school, how you prepare your application, and particularly the statement of purpose, which is the most important part of that application. As you already know, for the assignment for the course, wherein you can choose to do either a resume or a statement of purpose. If you do choose to do the statement of purpose, this information is going to be especially important to you. But even if right now you're working on your resume and you don't yet know if you're going to pursue graduate school, I encourage you to pay attention to this information because it may be that even if you aren't planning on it right now, that you realize you would like to pursue graduate school in the near future. So I think it's relevant to all of you, whether you have this on your radar right now or may come to that later on. The first thing I want to say about thinking about going to graduate school is this should fit into your thinking in the same way everything we've talked about to now has, in the sense that you need to be thinking about what your long-term career goals are, and then sort of working backwards from that to figure out if graduate school is necessary or a real value to the career you plan to choose, and if so that you can make the best use of your graduate degree towards achieving that career goal, right? So in other words, I don't think it's a good idea to choose to go to graduate school just because, for example, you're really interested in the subject that you majored in as an undergrad and you want to continue to study it. If, again, the long-term goal, it makes sense in terms of that goal to get a master's or a PhD or some other kind of graduate degree, then it's definitely important to start thinking about that and to plan for that. But if what you're ultimately planning to do it either doesn't require or does not benefit from that graduate degree, then you want to make sure you don't spend a lot of time and energy and money on something that may or may not actually figure into those plans. So again, as I've been saying all semester, I think it's really important to understand where you're heading, at least in a general sense, even if you don't know the details right now, and then plan accordingly, okay? So that's the first sort of caveat before we get into it. If indeed the careers you started to sketch out would benefit from you having further training beyond the bachelor's degree, then there's other set of questions to consider, which is what kind of a graduate degree should it be? There's, a master's degree and a PhD degree in many of the fields that are represented in, for example, at Northeastern, right? The majors that you're currently working on. And then there are also professional degrees, an MBA or a medical degree or a law degree, right? And there are various other kinds of sort of training programs. So there's a lot of options out there. And again, I think it's really important to figure out what exactly do you need, why do you want to get that graduate degree, and then make a good decision about it. One of the other considerations is when to do it. Do you need or want to go into graduate school immediately after graduating with your bachelor's degree? Or is it make more sense, either personally or professionally, for you to take some time? And I don't think there's an easy answer to that question either. I don't think you need to go directly into graduate school. I think there's value in taking a break. I think there's value in also working and getting experience in your ultimate career fields that will help you put your graduate training in perspective. And on the other hand, I think depending on the kind of graduate training you're going to pursue, it can take a really long time. So I do think there's something to be said for not waiting too long because you do ultimately want to get out of graduate school and pursue the career. So there's, again, each of you will need to sort of figure out what that sweet spot is in terms of giving yourself the time to do what you want to do and making sure you move the project forward. Okay, so let's say we've gotten to the point that graduate training does feel like it's important for the career you plan to pursue. And you have a sense of the timeline when you'd like to do that, then again, there's a bunch of finer questions to start answering. So within the general career field that you intend to pursue, often when you're pursuing graduate training, it's going to be a much more specific area that you will study and be trained in, right? So, for example, I'm an anthropologist. You don't go to graduate school just for anthropology in general. It's much more specific. You'll be pursuing a very specific area and subject and research agenda within that broad field of anthropology. And you need to know that before starting to apply. So what fields, to begin with, but also sort of what subject or question or problem or issue within that field is what's driving you to go to graduate school. And then where specifically, right? What university, what degree-granted program would be the best fit for you? And usually the answer is not one exact program, but several, right? But again, it's very specific. Just again, thinking about my field of anthropology, even just in the city of Chicago, there's very different programs at UIC versus at Northwestern versus the University of Chicago. All excellent programs, but they just specialize in different things. They have different faculty there. And those are some of the things you want to look at. Figuring out who the exact faculty are that are in that program and what their specialties are is going to be crucial. Again, not every anthropology department offers the same training, right? They have specific people, and those are the areas that they specialize in. You're also going to want to think about what kind of a university you'd like to be at and what kind of resources they offer. A big research university has all kinds of things to offer. Is that what you want, right? So starting to think about those kinds of things. Funding is another key question if you're going to go to graduate school. Ideally, you want to be funded for that, at least in part. Nobody wants to rack up tons of student debt. And especially in graduate school at that level, you definitely want to pursue funding as much as is possible. There's usually some amount of funding available, but again, that's another thing to look at as you start to look at the various programs you might apply to, right? How much funding do they have available? How many of their students get funded to do that work? And you can usually find that information out from the website. A lot of these things I'm talking about are kinds of information that you can find on the websites of the departments at the universities that you're considering pursuing. So it's going to be really important as an initial step to just get online and start looking up a bunch of different programs and really studying their websites. I'll show you just one example of a website in a minute, but academic websites include a ton of information, not only about what kinds of degree programs they offer, but also who their faculty are and what those faculty study, who their graduate students are, what kind of things their graduate students are doing, whether there's funding available and how you would get it, and of course also how to apply, which again is something you'll be thinking about if you're going to pursue graduate school in the near future. And then finally, location is also a consideration. And each of you probably has a different sense of how important that is. For some people, going to graduate school, they are focused on the training and the program and the faculty, and they don't care where it is, right? If you really need to be in a major city or, for example, near Chicago, then that obviously is something to consider. And that means you have a smaller universe of programs that you're looking at. So thinking about, where you're willing or able to spend time is also going to be one of the considerations. So let me just really quickly show you one academic website. And again, my field is anthropology, so that's why I chose it, but it's just an example. So this is UIC, right? University of Illinois at Chicago, right here in the town where we are. And this is their anthropology department's website. And I do it just to give you a sense of how to navigate and what to look for when you're starting to investigate potential programs. Most of these academic websites are set up in a somewhat similar way. They might call stuff slightly different things, but they'll have more or less the same categories of information. So UIC offers sort of the full range of degrees in anthropology, meaning you can get a bachelor's degree, you can get a master's degree, you can get a PhD, right? So if I were interested in pursuing graduate study in anthropology and I wanted to see what UIC has to offer, I might come to their website, right? You know, I don't want to get an undergraduate degree, although if you're interested, you can always check it out. But I want to get a graduate degree, so I might just check out the first page, right, the overview, where I find out that they have both MA and PhD programs in the 3 major subfields of anthropology: archaeology, biological anthropology, and cultural anthropology, right? And that which is common in the field of anthropology, but not in all fields. The primary expectation is that if you come in with just a bachelor's degree, you're going to go all the way through to a PhD, right? So they will admit people who just want a master's, but they're not going to get the same consideration, right? You can also get a master's somewhere else and do your PhD at UIC. So there's a few sort of avenues, but they have the full range of programs. And you can find out then more about, like, if I'm interested in becoming an archaeologist, then I can see sort of what their sort of areas of specialty are and who their faculty are, right? As I said, at a point where you're pursuing graduate study, you know, going to graduate school is not just sort of taking classes. You're really being trained to be a professional in a particular field. Again, it's going to be important that there are mentors available for you who are doing things that are relevant to what you want to do, okay? It's much less generalist than a bachelor's degree education. So again, if I'm interested in archaeology, then I want to figure out, like, okay, well, you know, here's an overview of the kinds of stuff that is available, right? Or the kinds of themes and areas that they offer. And then I can start looking at, you know, specific faculty. And what they do, right? So here's an archaeologist, faculty member, professor there, and he talks here about what his sort of primary areas of interest are, and what he's published, right? So if I were really serious, if I want to become an archaeologist, I want to definitely study who these folks are, and if I find somebody whose areas of interest are very close to what I think I want to do, it would probably behoove me also just to read something published by that person to really see, like, is this person, you know, somebody who would be good for me, right? So again, that's just sort of one example. But if you are serious about going to graduate school, get online and start looking at a bunch of different programs and see what's out there, okay? Okay. So as I alluded to before, you know, graduate school is different than getting an undergraduate degree. You do attend classes, particularly in the early part of a graduate program. But again, mostly what you're really doing is getting trained in a field. So for many fields, that would include learning how to do research and then doing research yourself, right? Which is what is the major project that you do in graduate school, a master's thesis or a PhD dissertation, is your original research that you do, right, under the mentorship of faculty in that program. And it's really sort of you now taking on that professional role within that field, right? And that's really how your training happens in graduate school, is you do the work yourself. And going to graduate school often also, for many folks, includes some amount of teaching. It's in part a place where you kind of become an apprentice teacher, and it's something you can also do as a way to fund your graduate education. So lots of graduate students do some amount of teaching that allows them to get part of their tuition waived, and maybe have a small income, etc. And also, again, to learn more about the field that they're involved in. So, again, graduate school is not the same as an undergraduate experience, in the sense that it's not primarily about classwork. Again, there's some of that, but it's mostly about hands-on training and really starting to do the thing that you will ultimately do once you're done with your degree. Okay, so let's talk really briefly about planning for applying to graduate school. As I said, one option for the assignment for this course is to write a statement of purpose. So I want to talk a little bit about the various things that go into a graduate school application, and then end on the statement of purpose, which is by far the most important part of your graduate school application. There are a bunch of things that go into a graduate school application, and some of them require planning ahead. All of them do, but to varying degrees. So I just want to sort of put that on your radar if you are planning to do this. Ideally, one would have sort of a whole year to accumulate all these different things that you need. You can apply with less, warning than that, but there are a number of things to put together. So the first is that most graduate school programs require some kind of test. It's the GRE, which is a general test, which has sort of the same thing as same components as on a lot of standardized tests: verbal, quantitative, analytical. Right? Those are. It's pretty easy to get access to taking a GRE test. They're testing centers. They now, since the pandemic, have started with an at-home option, so you can go find out sort of how to do it. And that's, again, a generalist test. It's not in a particular field. It's more like, sort of more typical standardized testing that are just testing your general academic readiness. If you're going to a professional school or interested in going to a professional school, there are specific tests for those, as I'm sure you know. The GMAT, LSAT, MCAT, which you can take at various times. Some are more accessible than others. Some are available all year round. Others have several times during the year when they're offered. For any of these tests, the GRE or the more specific tests, there are training courses and prep courses. You can do that. You don't need to do that. I would say that I think it's a good idea to prepare even on your own to some extent. For all of these tests, it's pretty easy to get sort of a self-help manual, right, which will give you sort of old test questions and help you sort of just get in the mindset to take it. I think it's worth doing that in the lead up to taking the test as opposed to just walking in completely cold. But I don't think you necessarily need to take a course. A couple of the other items then that, again, you need a little bit of advanced warning to pull together. Letters of recommendation are, of course, really important. Typically you need something like 2 to 4. One of the reasons I say this is something to plan in advance is not only that you need to ask someone and get them to agree and give them a little bit of time to do it, but you want to make sure that by the time you're ready, you have faculty members and others who are in a position to write a strong letter for you. So that means that you have folks who know your work well enough that they're really in a position to help you with that. Faculty want to write letters of recommendation, so it's not that. But if you have never talked to a professor that you then ask to write you a letter, it's just harder for that person to really talk about you and your work. So developing some kind of relationships with faculty and others that you can then turn to reflect and write about your work is going to be important. And then also in the moment, right, graduate school applications tend to be due around the same time. So those faculty members have multiple students often that they're writing letters for. So you want to make sure you give people enough warning, at least a couple of weeks, to write you good letters and not have to do it sort of at the last moment. Okay. And then finally, as I already mentioned, the statement of purpose is really the sort of the centerpiece of a graduate school application. It's the most important part, and it's a particular sort of piece of writing. I'm going to talk about that in more detail in a second. It's very specific about who you are and what you want to do as a graduate student, and why what you want to do is a good fit with that particular program. So you want to be really specific about your plans, not only in that graduate program, but beyond it, how you will use that graduate training to pursue a relevant career. You want to tie your plans as a graduate student to your past accomplishments, particularly as an undergraduate. So really showing sort of some continuity, right? You're kind of telling the story of who you are as a potential successful graduate student. And then, of course, you want to demonstrate that not only are you going to be a strong, successful graduate student in general, but why you're plans are a good fit with that specific program. That is, what they do, what they're good at, their strengths align with your interests, okay? And that includes particularly with the faculty that they have in that particular program. Okay, so again, this is just a sort of summary of what we've just been talking about. The applications often have multiple parts. You want to start working on them in advance, and you want to sort of compile all these different things and make sure you have enough time to get it all together. So again, I think starting the process a year before the applications are actually due is great. Not necessary. If you know, you only have 9 months, 6 months, whatever, you can still do it, but definitely giving yourself more time rather than less is going to be really important, okay? If you do have sort of a year, what I've included here, and I'll let you, you know, those of you who are going to pursue this in the next year or two, sort of read this mainly on your own, on the PowerPoint that I'm going to post as well. If you do have a year, this is just sort of a rough timeline of what to do during those sort of parts of that year, right? So assuming you're going to apply, say the applications are due in December, which they often are, right? They're often due sort of at the end of the year, or end and early beginning of the year, right? So if applications are due in December, then in January, the first sort of half of the year, you want to be planning, right? Finding those potential programs, starting to figure out who you want to have write letters of recommendation for you, get prepared at least to take the tests that you'll be taking probably in that summer, right? So this would be sort of starting the process, say if you're going to go directly from undergrad to grad school, in the spring semester of your senior year, right? Again, you don't have to go straight, but this is just sort of theoretically, right? And then the summer before they're due is really a time to get much more specific, right? Which of those programs are a good fit? Who are the faculty you might want to work with? You want to take those actual exams so that by the time you know, fall semester rolls around, you're ready. And then the fall would be the time to really get specific. Start to compile all those materials, ask your letter writers to write those letters, and work on that statement of purpose, right? Which ideally will go through multiple revisions, and you will have your advisor and maybe other faculty also look at it and give you feedback, right? The statement of purpose is not the kind of thing where you want to submit your first draft of it. You want it to be very polished and very considered. Definitely something you want to get feedback on and revise before you actually turn it in when those materials are due, again, in December-ish, December, January typically. Okay? All right. So let's, the final thing I'm going to talk about in this video is a much more specific sort of set of things to consider as you're writing a statement of purpose. So that's for those of you who are going to write the statement of purpose during this course, and those of you who maybe aren't going to do it right now but may want to return to this information later. The content of the statement of purpose. As I've already said, you want to be really specific about your interests and your goals. And that includes both what the issue or problem or topic is that you want to study or be trained in, and also who you want to work with in that program. Again, you're trying to demonstrate a good fit between your goals and the resources, particularly faculty resources available in that particular program, okay? And then you also want to make that continuity, that connection to what you've already done and what you're planning to do. When I talk about, you know, past experiences and training, really we're primarily talking about what you did as an undergraduate. You don't need to, and most of the time it's not a good idea to start all the way back, right, to give your entire life history starting from childhood. Nobody needs you to say that you've always wanted to be that thing that you're now applying for graduate school to do, right? You don't need to have wanted to do it since you were 3 years old. If your early life is directly relevant to what you want to do, then by all means, right? But really, the idea is to sort of, again, provide a sort of narrative of how what you're pursuing right now makes sense in terms of both your experiences and your strengths and your training, right? Things you've actually done, so you can demonstrate that you know about this thing you want to pursue and you've given good consideration to why you want to do it, okay? Now, all that said, right, so you're going to be very specific, you're going to be clear about your goals and plans, you're going to tie it into past experience and training, but you also do want to show that you're, not rigid, right? The idea is that you have a plan, but you're also sort of open to the experience of going to graduate school, right? And the various new things that you'll learn, right? So I think that's the sort of sweet spot to try to hit. Now, in terms of the presentation, that's also very important. As I said, this should be an extremely revised piece of writing. It needs to be, definitely no sort of typos, grammar errors, formatting issues, any of that. But, well written, well organized. You want it to be sort of very clearly laid out with a nice sort of beginning, middle, end, right? So it should really be sort of a little mini essay. You want it to be distinctive, right? You do want to demonstrate that you are unique, right? But don't get too overly creative in doing so, right? You don't want it to stand out in a bad way, right? So I think keeping it, as a sort of academic piece of writing, and using that kind of tone, right, is going to be important. But, again, you want to demonstrate that you are interesting, and if there are things about either your experience or your goals that will help you stand out, by all means, use those, okay? Final point about this, typically you're going to apply to more than one graduate school, right? You're going to put in multiple applications. And you don't want to write a brand new statement of purpose for every single one, but you should tailor the version of the statement to each program you're applying to. So you're going to have sort of your basic statement of purpose, right? The main one that you start with, but then you do want to go in and make a specific version of it for different schools where you talk about their particular, not just changing the name, right? That too, but you also sort of tailor it to what that program has to offer. Okay, so it shouldn't read like a generic statement of purpose. It should read like a statement of purpose for that exact program. All right. Okay. Here's some things, again, to think about, some prompts as you're starting to think about writing a statement of purpose. If you answer these questions, it can help you in terms of generating the material, right? So why are you interested in graduate study? Sorry, I've got some typos here. What's the specific topic or question or issue that you want to address? What are your specific career goals, and how will this degree help you to reach them, right? So again, the answer to that question should be more than just, I'm interested in this topic, right? Or I really enjoyed majoring in this. What is the question that animates your interest in being a graduate student and ultimately pursuing a career relevant to that graduate program? And then why that program, right? Why that specific program? Why that university? How does it fit in with your plans? What's special about you and about that program, and why is that a good fit, right? Don't be overly informal. Don't include irrelevant information in a statement of purpose. As I've already said, you don't need to write your life history. So again, it's very tailored. It's only typically about 2 pages long. So you want to make sure that you cover your bases, but in a concise and efficient way. And then the final sort of slide of information I'm going to give you, and I'll go over this sort of briefly now, but again, those of you who are going to pursue this assignment, I encourage you to go back to the PowerPoint and read this in more detail. The way the actual, once you've generated the answers to those questions that I've been talking about, how you want to actually lay out the essay, right? The statement of purpose itself. I give you sort of a four-parter here in terms of the sort of pieces, the stages you'll go through in this statement. So in the beginning, you want to sort of say who you are and what your interests and goals are, right? So sort of like any research essay, right? You're starting with your thesis, right? Like, here's what I'm about, right? Here's what I want to do. And then, again, like any other kind of academic writing, then you sort of go back and talk about how you got to that goal, right? So you start with your main argument. I want to, whatever, be a cultural anthropologist and do blank, blank, and blank. So that's part one, right? That sort of introductory piece. Then you're going to go back in part two and summarize what you did as an undergraduate and any other relevant training and experience, right? If in addition to completing an undergraduate degree, you've also got a bunch of work experience, if you did a research project, if you did an internship, if you wrote a thesis, any of those things, right? You want to go back that are relevant to this specific program. You want to go back and talk about all of that, right? So you're certainly going to talk about, like, I'm in the process or I've just completed a bachelor's degree in blah, blah, blah. But more specific than that. And in that degree, I particularly focused on this. I wrote a paper about that. I did an internship in this, right? So again, crafting a narrative that connects your training and experience to what you're going to do next. Part three, you're going to be very specific about that. What is the connection between what you've done in the recent past and what you want to do as a graduate student? What led you to this next step, right? And again, you need to know for yourself what did lead you there in order to answer this question. So this is also a good opportunity for sort of, self-reflection. Why do I want to go to graduate school? You need to articulate a clear argument for it, right? And then at the end, the fourth part, a detailed accounting of what you actually want to do as a graduate student, right? What do you want to study? What is, again, that question, problem, agenda that you want to pursue? Why do you want to do it at that exact location, like in that specific university, in that particular department? And I think ending with sort of just a show of enthusiasm, like, I'm thrilled to take this next step on my journey, blah, 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 right? Like, it needs to be about the details of what you want to do, but it needs to be something that you're clearly excited to be doing. That will also make a difference in how your essay comes across. So I know I've thrown a lot of information at you, again, which is partly why I encourage you to also go back and look at the specific details on the PowerPoint slides as you pursue writing this statement of purpose. It's an exciting moment. I know it sounds like a lot of work to apply to graduate school, and it is, but it's an exciting kind of work. Again, both because you're thinking about what's next, and you're just reflecting on really who you are and what you want to do. So I'll stop there, and we'll talk again soon.